Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time period you're watching us. This is Perspectives with Asma Silva, and this is my co-host, Hank. Today we have an excellent program and topic to cover, especially in the current day climate. Being October, and we just finishing October as Domestic Violence Month, but also knowing in the media with a lot of this sexual assault on women, talking about women's rights when it comes to this kind of circumstances. We have today Hasnaa Mokhtar, who is the Executive Director for the Center of Nonviolent Solutions in Worcester. She's also a PhD student at Clark and in her third year, I believe. We'd like to get the conversation started. Hank, did you have anything to?
I was just going to say, Asma, to follow up on your introduction. The fact is that it is much out there, and it certainly is much out in social media. And I think that particularly because it is in social media so much, so many women are posting Me Too, meaning that they have had some form of sexual abuse or derogatory language or whatever it may be directed at them. I think that even in this last month, we have seen a change in the way that men are perhaps looking at this. And I know that a lot of people that I have spoken to all of a sudden are doing a little bit of self-analyzing and saying, what are some things that maybe I did in my life that I didn't even realize? So I think that there really is kind of a shifting of how we view and how men in particular are viewing how they are treating and how they have treated women, and just the way in which we sometimes ask the question of, well, that's just the way that things are, or
Boys
why
will
would
be
you get
boys.
upset about exactly, or, well, if that happened, why in the world wouldn't you walk out on him? Why would you, why would you stay? And not realizing that perhaps those questions, or the way we talk and frame those questions, may have been part of the problem as well for all these years.
Right. And to get the conversation started, Hasnaa, I remember first contacting you specifically to talk about domestic violence, but when you started talking about it, you also brought in sexual assault. And I asked you this question, how exactly are they related together? Because we hear these two issues as separate issues. Can you tell us a little bit about why these two are related and how?
I think when we're talking about domestic violence, we're specifically referring to violence that occurs within the private sphere of the household, whether it's between intimate partner violence by a boyfriend and a husband, and so it's the private sphere of the household. When we talk about sexual assault, it could be perpetrated by somebody you know or a stranger in the street. So I think that's probably the primary difference. Other differences could be like domestic violence could be physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, economic, spiritual. It comes in many forms and shapes. Sexual assault is primarily, again, an attempt to making somebody uncomfortable with sexual advances, sexual comments. It could be as severe as rape. So, but I think there are no defined lines that separate one from the other. I think the lines are blurred, and sometimes even in the case of emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse, it's not something that you can show as domestic violence or rape in the case of rape. So that's a general statement about what are the differences. When I like to talk about this topic, I like to put it under the umbrella of gender-based violence, because yes, women are disproportionately subjected to more acts of violence. I mean, the UN Women states that 1 in 3 women are still the victims of a lot of all these forms of violence. Yet there are men who also experience violence, LGBTQ communities who experience violence, children, so it's just, it's wide. So I'd like to categorize it under gender-based violence. And again, it could be, it happened in the private sphere of the house, so that's basically personal direct violence. It could happen in institutions, basically in workforce, people in power positions, or it could manifest by state-sanctioned violence, and that could happen when there are policies in place that support, structural violence against certain people. So it's, as you can see, it's a very, the more I learn about this topic and in my school years, the more I realize how complex, how multifaceted, and then very complicated. And unfortunately, sometimes the media kind of reflects this as a Muslim household problem, yet throughout 2 years serving as a volunteer in Pathways for Change here at the local Rape Crisis Center in Worcester, as a hotline advocate, violence does not differentiate. It cuts across all religions, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, race. It's just, there's no difference. It happens everywhere. It's just like sometimes it manifests in different forms.
Could you explain to us what you meant by state-sanctioned, domestic violence or sexual assault? Just when you said that, I'm thinking, how could there be such a thing? So I'm a little confused. Can you explain a little bit further what that is?
Well, I can share with you a few here of the comments, of the explanations. State legitimizes power inequalities in family and society and perpetuates gender-based violence through enactment of discriminatory laws and policies or through the discriminatory application of the law. The state is responsible for tolerance of gender violence on an unofficial level in the family or in the community, to the extent that it's the state's recognized role to sanction certain norms that protect individual life and dignity and maintain collective peace. So these are just a few of what we mean. It could be also in terms of the institutionalized, accepted norms of gender roles, and some of the framing of certain problems against certain minority communities, that it goes back to the point that I just made earlier, that it's a Muslim problem, for example, or it's an African American problem. So, and that plays into certain policies. For example, recently, I think it's the second version of the Muslim ban, there was a segment about honor killings. And that's another big area that we can talk about. I mean, I have a problem with the phrasing of that, the honor killing itself, because again, there is a bias in the way these problems get reported. If it happens in a non-Muslim community, it's just a crime of passion or jealousy. But when it happens in a Muslim household, so it's an honor crime. So that's against sanctioned, the state-sanctioned, violence against certain minorities.
Well, I guess I want to follow up a little bit more on that, because when I hear about it, I mean, I don't really hear about it being specific to the Muslim community. I mean, the YWCA, their Daybreak program.
Yep.
I mean, they're trying to help people who are the victims of domestic violence. I guess I didn't really feel that it was being broken down into it's an African American problem, it's a Muslim problem. Do you with your work in the hotline, do you get that quite a bit? That people, I mean, at different sections of the community view it maybe in different ways? White, black, Latino? I mean, are they looking at this through a different prism?
I think you have to take into consideration how people understand the problem in different contexts and different households, and then we have the immigrant community, and so people might. It's
a cultural difference?
To a certain extent, again, I don't like to use the word culture because culture has so many different aspects, and most of it is good, but then, part of it is, yes, the culture of patriarchy, specific understanding that women are subordinate to men, and that's just not specific to a certain culture, but it manifests differently. And unfortunately, sometimes, for example, in Muslim communities, misinterpretation of religious sacred text, and that again is not Muslim, in Jewish communities and Christian communities, the misinterpretation of specific sacred text is used to justify that it's okay to discipline your wife. That a woman's role is basically to be a housewife, to stay in the house, to take care of the kids. I mean, much of that has changed, but it still exists, unfortunately. And again, violence cuts across all communities.
Based on what you just said, though, does that mean that the woman would not perhaps report it? And I guess what I'm thinking is no matter what your background or where you come from, I'm hoping that here in the United States, if you call up and say, I have been assaulted in my home by my husband or whoever it may be, that the police officer treats everyone exactly the same way and that the law is equal for all people. Is there certain parts of society that won't report it because they feel, oh, that's, I don't want to get the justice system involved?
I think it's a very complicated answer to your question. Women don't report it for several reasons. One of them is basically a fear of being stigmatized and the stereotypes around, being identified as a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence. A second one is, the emotional and the economic dependency sometimes on the spouse. One time I did a research for Abby's house here in Worcester to see the relationship between homelessness and victims of domestic violence, and sadly, it's a very high correlation. Women who end up leaving abusive homes without a support network, they end up on the streets. If the shelters, they have a limited capacity to cater to all these victims who come to seek homes, so they end up on the streets, and if they have kids, so
I would have, and I don't know, but I would think, but boy, being a young woman and then going into a shelter, which may be a male-dominated environment when you're just trying to leave an abusive relationship, would probably be a pretty scary
I think I've heard that from many
proposition.
women, if I'm not mistaken, that they are afraid to go into a shelter for just that reason, leaving one unsafe environment to another. But I believe you have a video you'd like to share with us.
Yes.
That's on a sexual assault, so maybe we can have our viewers view that video right now.
Sure.
According to the Centers for Disease Control, 1 in 5 women have been raped at some time in their life. The CDC estimates that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are victims of sexual assault before the age of 18. This means it is extremely likely that sexual assault has either impacted you or someone you know. A victim may or may not choose to seek help for a variety of reasons. What we do know is that the people around them can directly impact this decision. So listen up. 68% of sexual assault victims never tell the police. 98% of sex offenders never ever spend a day in jail. So why is it that many, many years pass before they tell anyone? Reporting a sexual assault is a complicated and personal decision. Here are a few common themes survivors mention when they're asked, "What made it difficult for you?" Blame. Victims are afraid they'll be blamed for what happened. They might feel that they did something to provoke the abuse. If they feel that they will be blamed, they may hesitate to come forward. They know the abuser. 90% of the time, the abuser is a family member, someone from the community, or a neighbor. Victims feel bad reporting someone they know to the police. Fear. After being sexually assaulted, the fear that the abuser will cause further harm is overwhelmingly real. Not being believed. Usually, the abuser will convince them that no one will believe them. Other times, the victim will tell someone and won't be taken seriously. The abuser is a respected leader. It is not easy to stand up to an abuser, let alone someone who is in a position of power or leadership. Abusers often use their position as a way to manipulate their victims into staying silent. The legal process is re-traumatizing. During an investigation, victims are taken through the painful experience all over again. Moreover, the defense often tries to blame the victim or tear the victim down by pointing out his or her flaws. Sex and sexual abuse are not talked about openly. The victim might think it's shameful or inappropriate to bring such issues up. Social consequences. Those who are part of close-knit cultural or faith communities may fear being outcasted, dividing the community, or never getting married. The survivor comes from a community that values forgiveness and covering up sins. There are faith communities that encourage victims of crime to show mercy and forgive their abusers, or to protect them by not exposing their crimes. Get it now? We live in a world where sexual violence is rampant. It is more likely than not that someone in your circle has been affected by sexual violence. Until we create safer communities in which more victims feel comfortable reporting and more abusers are held accountable, we can't prevent sexual violence. So what can you do? You don't have to be a police officer, a social worker, or an activist to take a stand against sexual violence. Here are 5 things you can do today to support victims of sexual violence. 1. Believe them. What you say to a victim can make a huge impact on his or her healing journey. 2. Encourage professional support. Meet them where they are rather than telling them what they should be doing. Empower them to make their own decisions. 3. Understand the barriers to disclosure and don't blame the victim. 4. Know where to direct them to get help. Most communities have local crisis centers, social service agencies, and hotlines. Know how to access local resources. You never know when you will need to use them. 5. Talk to your kids. Have honest conversations about healthy relationships, boundaries, and consent. You can empower someone to start their journey to healing and justice. Know where to get help. You are not alone. For more info, go to heartwomenandgirls.org.
So we're back from that video, and that was done by Heart Women and Girls. Could you tell us a little bit about that particular organization?
Sure. It's a Chicago-based local organization, co-founded and run by Nadia Mohajer, and it really it targets the Muslim community to kind of raise sex education, sexual violence awareness, and provides trainings, advocacy, research, and they've been doing a really amazing job in the community.
So with their statistics, when they said 1 in, I believe, 5 women,
yes,
and 1 in 6 boys,
yeah,
was that only for the Muslim community or generally?
in general, that's in general.
If it's that many, girl. First of all, I did not realize 1 in 6 boys.
Yeah,
that
really. Could I just the definition, is that 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 who have been raped, or that assault is categorized differently? It doesn't have to be rape.
It doesn't have to be rape. Okay. Yes.
Okay, but there's a lot of people hiding this
Yeah.
particular issue. I mean, that's a lot.
It is
That's
a
a
lot.
lot of numbers.
And I do think that, you know, as I watch the video and I think about what's happening in society today, this whole Harvey Weinstein, I mean, this has really brought it to the forefront and seems to have been a tipping point where so many people are coming forward, so many women are coming forward, and the story that they're telling about this individual in Hollywood is striking such a chord with so many women. And again, and I think with some, you know, men as well, to say, geez, what has my behavior been like over, you know, the last 40, 50, 60 years? You know, I'm taking a picture with someone, my arms around them, and I did something inappropriate. I mean, I think that men, I've seen where it just seems that this scandal is big enough that it's starting to change a little bit, hopefully, of what we saw in the video, where people are going to begin to understand the seriousness of this. This whole Me Too campaign on social media, I think, has been very powerful.
Yes, but still there's a lot of work that needs to be done, you know. Just the examples you gave are like minor. When we talk about sexual assault, I mean, we talk about somebody being forced into situations where they are violated sexually. And then most of the time it's about control from the perpetrator, to force control and dominance and power. And so I think there's definitely a lot more work that needs to be done in regards to intervention and prevention.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean to,
Yeah.
I hope that I didn't try to minimize in any
No,
way,
no,
'cause
no,
that was not my
yeah.
intent. I guess my intent was when you see someone like Ben Affleck who comes forward and apologizes and says, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, on some MTV show, I absolutely grabbed that woman's breast when I went up there because I was a star, and because she was a starlet, because I thought that it would be funny. And you know what? That was wrong, and I apologize. Now, he didn't, you know, assault her, well, he did, but he didn't, you know, to the extent that he raped her. But he now realizes, and I think that men, or the society in general, realizes, oh, all right, wait a minute, there's probably 1 million people who watched that video and laughed.
Yeah.
and now realize that, okay, that's crossing a line.
Sure, and the consequences it leaves on the person who's being assaulted. I mean, he might have apologized now, but can we imagine all these past years, this person, how they felt, how did it affect their social relationships with their people, their social circle, how they survived? I mean, some people cannot, like, one of the things that we kind of detect on the hotline is like suicide attempts, because sometimes people get so trapped in these traumatizing experiences that they can end up ending their lives.
Well, in that situation you described, depending upon the girl, she might have actually thought, oh wow, I got attention from a big star. And in that moment, she may not have, I'm assuming, considered it assault. May have gotten a lot of, comments from her friends who might have been there saying, wow, he noticed you, you caught his attention. But I'm assuming afterwards is when some of this, it sits in of, I felt like an object in the end. I mean, so the reaction of the woman at first could possibly
I guess,
be...
And she was in the business as well as an actress. But I mean, I guess what I was sort of taking away too was that I think that for a lot of years, assault meant rape. Yep. Or I am going to, because of my position, coerce you into sexual favors because I can stop your career, well, everything that we just saw in the video. Go ahead, tell as many people as you want, because you know what? I'm just going to stand up there and say, I didn't do it, and who are you going to believe? And then you're going to lose, your income. I hope that that is starting to change a little bit, that we are understanding that, well, as a presidential candidate, I mean, the President of the United States said, hey, you know what? I'm on The Apprentice. I'm a big celebrity. Women will let me do anything I want. Right. And use the most horrible example that we can think of to illustrate his point. I hope that at least, and I feel that this Weinstein thing has been such a turning point, a tipping point, that I hope that that's starting to change. I'm not working with it every day. You are. I'm actually kind of starting to feel like, you know what, I probably don't know anything. And maybe that's part of where it comes from. If we can, guys like me can just acknowledge, I don't know anything. I don't even realize the extent to which it's going on.
I mean, yes, the conversation started happening regarding that campaign is good, but I think it's still like, let me give you an example of how I see it. Like, October is also a breast cancer awareness month. So everywhere you go, there's like pink, right. And the conversation is publicly welcome. People, like, it's not a taboo anymore. But when it comes to these issues, they're still like, it's not as much as we want them to be. That people are comfortable to talk about them, that we kind of create the awareness within our kids and our children in schools and in institutions that certain behaviors are not accepted or not tolerated. That if you need help, it's okay to seek help, whether women and men, they're not stigmatized, they're not, but unfortunately, we're still not there yet, people still can't come forward, even for people, perpetrators. I mean, in no way I do, what I'm about to say is an excuse for any behavior, but I think it's important to realize that men need the emotional support too, to kind of deal and grapple with the things that they go through. The field of men and masculinities in relation to sexual assault and domestic violence have just recently started growing, and it's just considering the social construction of what a man should be and how the stereotypes of he has to be, an alpha man, he has to be like the breadwinner, he has to bring, and all these pressures on men, and sometimes that leads to certain emotions being trapped within them, and then it creates anger, and that leads to men wanting to assert control and power by using violence. And so there's so many dimensions to this that it's like, I don't even know where to begin. But yes, there's a good conversation that started, but we need to do more, definitely.
I had a question. We're very short on time, but we'd like to extend this conversation if we can with you, because I think there's just so much to discuss. But before our session ends for today, what I wanted to know is that in the video we noticed that people of power are necessarily not accounted for their actions. They get away with it. 98% of the people don't serve any in prison or any consequences. So what does that mean in terms of laws? What are we looking for? Are we looking for people of power and status to be a little bit more scrutinized than someone else just because of the statistics? Or What do we want for our legal system and to move forward and to address this issue?
Definitely. I mean, the law should not differentiate between someone in power and someone who's not. I mean, at the end of the day, when you assault somebody, you should be accountable for what you did. It's a crime against a human being, and it should not be tolerated that somebody in a power position would get away with murder. So, you know, I mean, if somebody in power shoots somebody else or kills somebody else, are they going to get away with it? It's not the same. So why are we treating domestic violence and sexual assault differently?
Well, except also from the video, it seems as if a lot of the reason that there's that 98% is because so many people don't report it because of what they're going to have to go through, as opposed to you report it, you go on trial, and then the guy gets away with it. Yeah. I don't know what that.
Yeah, what is the 98%?
It seems like a lot of it just doesn't get reported.
Is it because of the people who reported and they didn't, 98% didn't get prosecuted, or is it that they didn't report it and out of the reports 98%?
But if you connect it to the other points in the video, it's like, again, it's the blaming the victim. Sometimes it's hard to prove, you know. It's the trauma that the women experience through the whole, you know, attending court sessions and whatnot, because that's, you have to put yourself in that person's position, because that's like an ongoing painful experience that never ends every time you sit in a courtroom and being subjected to all these questions and reimagining the scenario of, so it's not just the fact that it's just someone in a power position.
Yeah, your reputation is the one that seems to end up suffering rather than the person who perhaps...
And being blamed for it. Like, why did you dress this way? Why did you walk out at night at 4 o'clock in the morning on your own?
You wouldn't have gone back to his apartment if you didn't know what was going to happen. We have just one moment left in this program to get your perspective.
Well, thank you for joining us, and I would love to continue this conversation. I think we just, you know, just hit the tip of the iceberg. But before we finish today, I think that this is one of those issues that all of us need to talk about, get educated on. And Hank was saying that as men or women out there who may not know all these statistics, this is a time to get to know more of it. That's the reason why we dedicate a month particular to domestic violence. But with the current issues, we obviously know that there's more issues to sexual assault that is also related to domestic violence. And the only thing we can do for all our children, regardless of boys or girls, look at the statistics. I'm surprised. The number of boys, 1 in 6 boys. I never thought of that. That was surprising for me. This obviously is an issue that we all need to address for all the sake of our children. And create safe spaces for them to come and really talk to us and confide in us. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to having this conversation again.